Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss any more shocking and captivating stories. Enjoy watching. Mark Turner sat at the kitchen table, staring at the email on his phone. His wife Sarah had just left for the day, telling him she'd be at a business dinner with one of her colleagues, Michael Thompson. It was supposed to be a routine evening. He'd planned to finish some paperwork and maybe catch a game on TV. But something didn't sit right. There was an odd tension in the air, a lingering thought that Mark couldn't shake off. He had learned long ago to trust his gut, and his gut was screaming at him now. It had all started a week ago. Sarah had been acting strangely, distant, distracted. She'd been coming home late from work, barely acknowledging him when she walked through the door, her mind seemingly elsewhere. There were nights when she would claim to be busy with work emails or a last-minute project. But Mark noticed the subtle changes, the way she'd become overly protective of her phone, the sudden late nights, and the out-of-place excuses. He tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just stress from her job at the marketing firm. After all, she'd been climbing the corporate ladder for years, and stress came with that territory. But tonight, the email changed everything. The subject line was innocuous: hotel reservation confirmation, Thompson and Turner. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he opened it. It was a reservation at a boutique hotel downtown, one of those trendy spots with sleek modern rooms and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He quickly scanned the details, and there it was. Sarah's name, his wife's name, attached to the booking. But what caught his attention wasn't just the reservation itself, it was the date. The dinner was for tonight. And then there was something else. Michael Thompson's name, attached as the second guest. Mark's blood ran cold. His mind raced. He thought back to Sarah's casual mention of her business dinner earlier that day. She hadn't said anything about staying overnight at a hotel. When had this trip been planned? Why didn't she tell him? The hotel booking didn't just raise his suspicions. It screamed betrayal. He stared at the email for what felt like hours, but it was only a few minutes. His hand gripped the phone tighter, knuckles white. Mark had never been the paranoid type, but this was different. This felt like confirmation of everything he hadn't wanted to believe. But how could he confront her? How could he ask her about this without sounding like a jealous fool? He had to know for sure. He needed more than just this email. Mark wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but right now, doubt gnawed at him like a relentless hunger. With a heavy sigh, he pocketed the phone and grabbed his jacket. He couldn't wait. He had to see for himself. When he reached the hotel, Mark felt a mixture of nervous energy and anger. The thought of confronting Sarah in front of Michael was both terrifying and cathartic. But was that the right move? What if she had a perfectly innocent explanation? What if it was all a misunderstanding? Mark couldn't answer those questions, but as he entered the lobby, he knew he'd find out soon enough. The receptionist, a young woman with short blonde hair and a friendly smile, greeted him as he approached the desk. "Hi, how can I help you?" she asked. Mark took a deep breath. "I'm here to check in for a reservation under Sarah Turner." She typed something on the computer, then glanced back at him with a polite smile. Yes, Mrs. Turner's reservation. Let me just get you a key." His heart skipped again. This was it. As the receptionist handed him the key, he felt the weight of the moment. He needed to keep his cool. No matter what he found behind that door, he had to stay composed. Mark took the elevator up to the floor indicated on the key card. Each second felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, he stood in the hallway, his nerves on edge, every fiber of his being screaming at him to turn around. But he didn't. He couldn't. The door to the room was just ahead. He approached slowly, trying to steady his breath. His hand reached out for the doorknob, his pulse raced in his ears. And then, just as he was about to turn the handle, he heard laughter. It was faint but unmistakable, Sarah's voice. "Are you sure she'll be okay with this?" It wasn't just her voice. There was another man's too. Mark froze. His mind raced as the laughter continued. Was it possible? Could it really be? Before he could make another move, the door opened. Mark's eyes met Sarah's, her face instantly drained of color, and her expression shifted to one of shock. She hadn't expected him to be here. Behind her, Michael Thompson stood, his shirt untucked, a glass of wine in his hand. Mark didn't need to hear any more. In that moment, Mark's world shattered. Everything, the years of marriage, the late nights, the secrets, the whispered phone calls, it all came crashing down around him. But he didn't say a word, not yet. He simply turned on his heel and walked away. Sarah called him over and over that night, but Mark couldn't bring himself to answer. The woman he had married, the one he trusted, had betrayed him. He needed space to think, to process, and most of all, to figure out what to do next. The next day when Sarah came home, Mark was already waiting for her. Sarah's keys clinked against the counter as she walked into the house, her eyes darting nervously toward the living room where Mark sat waiting. He had been quiet since the previous night, but his silence had been heavier than any argument they'd ever had. Mark. Sarah's voice wavered, soft and unsure. She had called him repeatedly, sent a dozen texts, but he hadn't responded. She knew something was wrong. Can we talk? Mark didn't answer right away. His eyes didn't leave hers as she walked toward him, looking for some sign of warmth, some trace of the man she'd once known. But there was none. The air was thick, laden with tension and unspoken words. He finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk, Sarah. About last night." She shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting to the floor. She wanted to speak, to offer some kind of explanation, but she knew deep down that no words could make it right. "Look," she started, rubbing her palms together nervously. I didn't think you'd find out this way. It's not what you think." Mark's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had to hear her say it. He needed her to admit it. "Then what is it, Sarah? Because I'm pretty sure I saw the truth with my own eyes." He stood, moving closer to her. "You and Michael. In that hotel room. I heard you both. I saw the reservation. And then you were laughing together like nothing was wrong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she wouldn't let herself cry. Not yet. She had to maintain control. But inside, she could feel the weight of his gaze. The anger, the betrayal. "Mark, please," she whispered, looking up at him now, her voice trembling. "I didn't want you to find out like this. It was a work event. Michael is a colleague, and this dinner was just. It's not what you think." I swear Mark could feel his frustration rising. Every fiber of his being wanted to scream, to demand the truth from her, but he kept his composure. He had to hear everything. He had to hear her justify it all. "Sarah, don't insult me," he said, his voice cold. "I've been married to you for years. I know when something's off. Don't lie to me." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words got stuck in her throat. For the first time, she was starting to realize that her world was coming apart. And no matter how much she tried to explain, she couldn't undo the damage. I was trying to protect you, Mark. I didn't want to hurt you. I thought it was just a small thing. But I was wrong," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark's heart twisted. She was admitting it, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't the woman he thought he knew. This wasn't the woman he trusted. "So, what?" Mark's voice cracked as he asked, trying to keep the anger at bay. "You thought it was a small thing to cheat on me, with one of your colleagues?" Sarah winced at the words. She knew she couldn't sugarcoat this anymore. The guilt, the shame, it all flooded back. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't think it would go this far. I never meant for it to get out of control, but Michael, he's been there for me in ways you haven't. We started out as friends, but somewhere along the way it became something more. I know I messed up. I know I've ruined everything." Mark stood still, absorbing her words. The more she said, the more his heart ached. He felt like he was suffocating. His mind raced, jumping from thought to thought. Was this what his life had come to? Was this who Sarah really was? The woman he had built a life with, the woman he thought would always have his back, had been lying to him for months, maybe longer. "Is this it then?" he asked, his voice quieter now, colder. "Was our marriage a joke to you? Was I just a placeholder while you sought out something else with him?" Her eyes welled with more tears, and this time she couldn't hold them back. "No, Mark, it wasn't like that. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. I was selfish, and I'm sorry. You don't deserve this." Mark felt a deep ache in his chest as he looked at her. He had known that this conversation would tear them apart, but now that it was happening, he wasn't sure what to feel. Anger, betrayal, sadness. "Do you love him?" Mark asked suddenly, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. Sarah hesitated, her eyes flickering away. "I don't know. I'm so confused right now. I've hurt you, Mark, and I know it. But I never stopped loving you. Not completely. I made a mistake. A huge mistake." The answer cut him to the core. Mark didn't know how to respond. The idea of Sarah being with someone else, sharing herself with another man, was too much to bear. "Maybe that's the problem," Mark said bitterly, backing away from her. "You don't know what you want." "But I do." Sarah reached out for him, her voice desperate. "Mark, please don't give up on us. Please don't leave me." But Mark shook his head, the decision already made. The hurt was too deep. The trust was broken. And once trust was shattered, could it ever be repaired? "I can't, Sarah," he said, his voice firm. "I can't stay in a relationship where I'm not enough, where I'm just the second choice, where I'm the one who gets lied to. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine." He turned away from her then, his back to the woman who had once been his everything. As he headed toward the door, he heard her voice again, pleading for him to stay. "Please, Mark, please don't leave me. We can work this out. I'll make it right, I swear." But Mark didn't stop. He couldn't. When he stepped out of the house and into the cold night air, he knew that his life was about to change forever. He had to leave. He had to go. The damage had been done. As he drove away, he realized that he couldn't go back. He couldn't pretend anymore. Mark didn't go to work the next day. He couldn't. How could he? The house felt empty without Sarah, but it also felt strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, he had no one to answer to, no one to lie to, and most importantly, no one to betray him. The silence was deafening, but it was a silence he had earned by finally taking control of his life. For the next few days, Mark's world revolved around a single thought: what now? He knew that confronting Sarah had been the right thing to do, but the fallout was harder than he could have imagined. There were moments when he'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and the weight of the betrayal would hit him all over again. Was he really done with her? Was it possible to rebuild from this? But deep down, Mark knew he couldn't. The trust, the foundation of their marriage, was irreparably damaged. Once the veil of suspicion had been lifted, he realized he didn't even recognize the woman Sarah had become. The woman he had shared his life with was gone, replaced by someone who was capable of such deceit. There was no coming back from that. It was a Friday afternoon when Sarah showed up at his door. She had been calling, texting, and emailing him nonstop, but Mark had ignored it all. But now she was standing there looking more broken than he had ever seen her. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Mark, please, just let me explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling as she stood on the doorstep. He wanted to slam the door in her face. He wanted to scream at her, to tell her how badly she had hurt him. But something in her eyes stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine remorse, or maybe it was the hurt she wore like a second skin. Whatever it was, it gave him pause. "I've heard everything, Sarah," he said, his voice calm but laced with pain. "I've heard enough. What's left to explain?" She reached out a hand as though trying to reach him, but he took a step back. "I've made so many mistakes. I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've destroyed everything we built. And I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But Mark, I swear to you, I never meant for this to happen." And Mark felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to feel sorry for her. He really did. But the anger, the betrayal, it was too much to push aside. "Why Sarah?" he asked quietly. "Why him? Why did you choose him?" I didn't choose him. It just happened. And it wasn't like it started out as something intentional. It was emotional, you know. It wasn't about the sex, it wasn't about anything physical. It was about the connection I felt with him when I didn't feel that from you anymore." The Mark swallowed hard. She was talking, she was explaining, but nothing made it better. No matter how she spun it, the truth remained. She had betrayed him, and in the most painful way possible. "So what? I wasn't good enough for you. Was that it?" Mark's voice was strained, the hurt creeping back into his tone. Sarah's lips quivered, and her eyes filled with more tears. "No, it wasn't about you not being enough. It was about me. I was lost, Mark. I felt neglected. I felt alone, and Michael, he was there. He understood me when I felt like you didn't." Mark couldn't believe what he was hearing. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way she justified it. The way she blamed him for her own choices. "You're right," Mark said, his voice suddenly cold, almost distant. "I didn't see you. I didn't pay attention. I got caught up in my own life, in my own world. But I never thought you'd do something like this. I never thought you'd lie to me. And for that I can't forgive you." Sarah's body trembled as she collapsed against the doorframe, her face a mask of regret and disbelief. "Mark, please don't say that. Please don't leave me." But Mark was already stepping back, his mind made up. He had made a promise to himself that he wouldn't let this break him, that he would move on. He could already feel the weight lifting off his chest, as painful as the process was. "I can't be with you anymore, Sarah," he said, his voice steady, though the words felt like they had been ripped out of him. "I can't be the man you need me to be if you're not even the woman I thought I married." Her hands were shaking as she reached out for him one last time. "Mark, please. I love you." But Mark shook his head. "No, you loved someone else." He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there, broken. She didn't try to follow him this time. She knew it was over. The divorce wasn't quick. It dragged on for months, as both of them tried to untangle the mess they had made of their lives. But in the end, Mark walked away with his head held high. He had his dignity, and he had learned a hard lesson that no matter how much you love someone, No matter how deep the bond, trust, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Sarah tried to win him back, but Mark knew there was no going back. She had shown him who she really was, and he wasn't going to be a part of that anymore. Weeks passed. Mark threw himself into his work, into his hobbies, into anything that could distract him from the pain. He went out with friends, spent more time with his family, and began to rediscover who he was outside of his marriage. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day he felt stronger, more whole. One day, a few months after the divorce was final, Mark ran into Sarah at a coffee shop. She looked different, like she'd aged years in the short time since their separation. She had lost weight, her hair wasn't as neat as it used to be, and there was a sadness in her eyes that was hard to miss. "Mark," she said, her voice tentative. He looked up at her, but there was no anger now, no bitterness, just a calm indifference that surprised even him. "Hi, Sarah," he said. "How are you?" She sighed, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation. "I'm okay. Trying to get my life together. I made a huge mistake, Mark. I wish I could take it all back, but I can't. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." Mark nodded slowly, his eyes locking with hers. "You don't owe me an apology anymore. You made your choices, and I made mine." There was a long silence between them before Sarah spoke again. "I hope you find happiness, Mark. I hope you find what you're looking for." He looked at her for a moment, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I already have." As he stood up to leave, he felt a strange sense of closure. He had gotten his revenge not through some dramatic act of vengeance, but simply by walking away, by refusing to let her define him anymore. And that, he realized, was all the victory he needed. Mark never imagined that the hardest part of his life would come after the divorce was finalized. It wasn't the legal battles, the paperwork, or even the moving out. It was the quiet emptiness that followed, the heavy silence that hung in his apartment every time he came home. The life he had built with Sarah, the dinners, the shared memories, the laughter, felt like they had evaporated into thin air. But slowly, Mark began to feel something else, peace. It was a slow realization that he was no longer walking on eggshells, no longer pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. He had been living in a lie, and now, for the first time in years, he was free. It was an overcast Saturday when Mark finally decided to start putting things in order. The apartment still had remnants of Sarah, photos on the walls, some of her things tucked away in drawers, an old coffee mug sitting idly on the kitchen counter. At first, he had thought about keeping everything. Maybe he could salvage the good memories, forget the bad ones, but he knew better now. It was time to move forward, completely. Mark packed away the last of her things into boxes. As he folded up a sweater of hers, the smell of her perfume still lingered faintly on the fabric. For a moment, he was overcome with a sense of nostalgia, the Sarah he had once known, the woman who had been his best friend, his partner. He let out a shaky breath, but he didn't linger on it. He had to keep moving forward. Later that afternoon, he took the boxes to the storage unit. The moment the door closed behind him, the weight he had been carrying seemed to lessen just a little. He realized that letting go of her things wasn't just about cleaning up his physical space. It was about cleansing his life, removing the last bits of her from the corners of his world. A few weeks later, Mark found himself at a local bar with his best friend Jake. It had been a while since they'd gone out, and Mark needed a distraction. Jake was his go-to guy, the one who always knew what to say, even when there was nothing to say. So Jake began, taking a swig of his beer. "How's life treating you post-divorce?" And Mark chuckled bitterly. "Well, I'm not crying into my pillow anymore, so that's progress." Jake grinned. "Good to hear. But seriously, man, it's been months. Are you okay?" Mark stared into his drink for a moment, letting the question hang in the air. He had told everyone, including himself, that he was fine. But Jake wasn't asking for a simple answer. Jake wanted the truth. "I'm better than I was," Mark finally said, the words feeling like they belonged to someone else. He was getting used to saying that. "It's just, sometimes it hits me, you know. How much time I wasted. How much I gave to someone who didn't care enough to give it back." Jake nodded. "I get it, man. Trust me. But you've got to remember, you're not the one who screwed up here." Mark took a long sip of his beer, feeling the bitterness burn down his throat. He wasn't sure if Jake understood. He wasn't sure if anyone could. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was everything. The lies, the secrets, the version of himself he had become while trying to save a relationship that had already been lost. "I know. I keep telling myself that. But it's hard not to feel like I should have seen it coming," Mark muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's like I missed all the signs, all the red flags. Was I really that blind?" Jake leaned back, his eyes narrowing in thought. "Maybe. But you know what? You were in love. That's not something you should apologize for. You trusted her and you gave it your all. The only person who's at fault here is Sarah, not you. Mark felt a weight shift inside him as he processed his friend's words. Jake was right, of course. Mark had given everything, and maybe that was the problem. He had given so much of himself that he'd forgotten to protect the most important part of all, his own heart. They didn't talk much more about Sarah after that. Jake could tell Mark was done, and Mark wasn't sure he had it in him to discuss her anymore. She was a chapter in his life, but that chapter had been closed, and he needed to write a new one. A month later, Mark was sitting in a coffee shop, flipping through the pages of a book he hadn't been able to finish during the chaos of his divorce. He was beginning to feel like himself again. He had started running every morning, had taken up photography, and had reconnected with old friends. It was the little things that brought him joy now, small victories that reminded him of his strength. Then he saw her. Sarah stood across the room, her back to him, looking at a menu on the wall. His heart did a strange little jolt, but he didn't freeze. He didn't feel the old familiar ache. He just watched her for a moment, noticing how different she looked. She seemed smaller somehow. The woman who had once been his everything seemed lost. For a moment, he debated whether to approach her. But something inside him told him that this moment wasn't about revisiting the past. It was about leaving it there, where it belonged. He stood up and walked toward the exit, passing by Sarah without a word. She didn't notice him, and for a brief second he felt relieved. He didn't want to be caught in a moment that would only drag him back into the life he was trying to escape. But as he reached the door, he heard her voice. Mark. He stopped, his hand on the door. He didn't turn around at first. He didn't know what to say. But he had come this far. He couldn't go back now. He slowly turned around. She was standing there, her eyes wide, as if she had just woken up from some long, terrible dream. I didn't expect to see you here, Sarah said, her voice soft and certain. How have you been? Mark met her gaze, his eyes steady, his heart surprisingly calm. I've been good, he said simply. I'm moving on. You should too. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words seemed to die on her lips. There was no more explanation, no more apology to offer. And in that moment, Mark realized something. He didn't need her closure. He didn't need her to fix the broken pieces of their past. He had already done that for himself. With one last look, Mark turned and walked out the door. Mark's life had changed. Not in the way he had expected, but in the way he needed. He had learned the hard way that sometimes love wasn't enough to keep a relationship together. Trust was the glue, and once it shattered, everything fell apart. But he had survived, he had rebuilt, and now he was ready for whatever came next, knowing that his past would never define him again. The end.